Rabbi Friedman, thank God it's Tuesday. Thank God we have this phenomenal opportunity to get some real wisdom from you once again. And the topic is a harsh one. It's a harsh one, and of course it has to do with the news. The news that happened last Thursday when a building collapsed in Miami. And now we are receiving information that the developers allegedly paid off the local officials, and the building was built, and so many hundreds of lives were lost. I mean, I'm afraid we're going to get a lot more bad news in regarding to that particular situation as far as how many lives were lost. It's not very optimistic. And there's so much more where we can question how much does today's society value life? How valuable do we think life is? And of course, not just our own life. We can't think here in terms of just thyself. So just few things that I have found. Again, this was a Gallup survey, and this is where America stands. And according to, let's call it, value of life, 45 Americans have a living will. 45% of all Americans have a living will. 54% of all Americans find death penalty acceptable. 47% of all Americans think it's morally acceptable. Abortion is morally acceptable. And, well, that's a lot. Let's just go with these three things which kind of identify where we stand as far as how we value life. So since we have this series the last couple of weeks about what's moral and what's not moral, how do we define this particular topic? How does today's society value life and all the indications, moral or immoral?
You notice the contradiction, the inconsistency. People are in favor of the death penalty, and they're in favor of abortion. There's a terrible contradiction here. For example, the death penalty is acceptable and justified for, let's say, murderers. So if you take a life, you should lose your life. But then you can do abortions. So are you defending life or are you discarding life? So confused. And even if the death penalty is not for murder, it's for kidnapping. Why is that so terrible? Because life is precious. So what are you doing abortions for? It's very confusing. And that's because we have too many gods. We worship too many gods. There's the God of the Bible, very big, very popular, been around for a long time. And because of that, we have certain moral principles and maybe even the death penalty. But then again, we also have the God of equal rights, the God of feminism, the God of science, so-called science, that tells us that a fetus is not a human being. Too many gods. Pick one God and stick to it. Don't have so many gods. It's confusing. If you're going to be immoral, be immoral. Stand up for your principles.
That is the problem, Rabbi Friedman. How do we even react to everything that is going on? I mean, yeah, everything is contradictory. So we need to understand what's good, what's bad, and go to the source, which explains to us realistically what, like all these things that I have just mentioned. I mean, how would the Torah, if we had really good leadership right now, the kind of leadership that we can trust, how would these situations be treated? How would the people that build a building without any regard for human life, of what can happen just to make a few bucks, and those people who approved it, how would those people be treated should be treated in accordance to the Torah laws?
I would hate to have to be the judge. But it's the nature of the criminal that they are so convinced that they won't be caught. In a sense, they're very optimistic people, these criminals. If they knew for sure that this was going to happen, they would never do it. But the lure, the temptation of the money, and the kind of easy dismissal, it'll be okay, it won't happen, we'll get away with it. That combination is dangerous. So the Gemara says that a good person is someone who will go out of their way to make sure that there is no danger. Not only to make sure that there is no damage. If you're not concerned with the danger to human beings, to lives, then you're not a righteous person. That's an important lesson. And in order to avoid a danger for others, you should even sacrifice a little of your own well-being. That's how far you take this. Just the danger, the possibility of somebody getting hurt. Is that noise disturbing?
A little bit. I don't know what it is.
I've got drilling in the front of the house, sawing on the back of the house.
You're doing renovations. That's good news.
That's New York.
Yeah. But how would those things... Okay, so you did not think ahead and you endangered people's lives. What is it punishable by? Or is it punishable? It's an accident. It's carelessness, not on purpose. Kind of. What would be the consequences if things were perfect?
I'm not sure what the legal definition would be. Some kind of a negligence. In civil law, what would that be considered? Endangerment, something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know the legal side, but on the moral side, the lack of concern, the indifference, the willingness, that's I guess what it boils down to. The willingness to risk other people's lives so that I can make a nice profit. That's pretty nasty when you put it that way.
Yep.
So I don't know if it's intentional out to kill, but even the willingness to risk, how is that justified?
As far as I know, if I'm sorry to interrupt, but if I have my knowledge intact, as far as I know, there is a law in accordance to the Torah of how one builds a roof on a house, so nobody falls from it. It has to have some sort of, please, you're better at it than I am.
Yeah. If you have a flat roof and people can stand there, then you must build a fence around it. And you can't rely on, people will be careful. It's okay. It's only a risk. There's only a danger of somebody getting hurt. And for that, you are obligated to go out of your way, build a fence, and make sure that that danger doesn't exist anymore.
So this is a specific Torah law. It's in the Torah, correct?
Yes.
Wow. So we have been given that instruction. The whole world, not just the Jewish people. The whole world has this law intact, and yet it doesn't seem to faze anybody.
I'll tell you an interesting little story. There was a doctor, a heart specialist, who became observant. His wife became observant. And they were keeping all the commandments, everything. They were behaving in full, observance of every mitzvah, of every custom, everything. They were in completely. But he didn't wear a kippah to work. And this bothered his wife. And they were very close with the Rebbe. So one day, when she was speaking to the Rebbe, the wife said, "Why don't you tell my husband to wear his kippah to work?" And the Rebbe said, "He's a surgeon. He's a doctor. He has patients whose lives are in his hand. If I tell him to wear a kippah, he would, but he would feel uncomfortable. And that discomfort puts his patients at risk. So I cannot take a chance." That's how you're supposed to take care of lives. I mean, what's the danger? He's a good surgeon. He'll do a good job. Yeah, but if you make him a little self-conscious, if you make him a little bit uncomfortable, that can, in some very subtle way, can harm the patient. If the doctor is not completely focused, if he's not completely there, it's a risk. Very, very subtle risk, very justifiable. I mean, nobody would say, "How dare you treat your patient while wearing a kippah?" So if, God forbid, something went wrong, they wouldn't blame him. Nobody would even think to blame him. But the Rebbe's commitment to life was so acute. It was so focused that anything that could compromise somebody's well-being, isn't that amazing?
That is more than amazing. The only problem is none of us are on the level of the Rebbe where we can make qualified decisions like that and know that they're right. And that's the biggest problem with all of us right now, is that everything is being done based on somebody thinking that this is right or this is right, and that is getting us to the predicament where we are. So I'm very grateful for this series of programs where we can basically determine what's good and what's bad, because it became so muffled. It's getting unmuffled. It's getting unraveled, but we're still not there yet.
Well, it's almost like, do I want this to be moral? Do I want this to be immoral? And that's how I decide whether it's moral or not. That's that's pretty sad.
But we got to the truth based on the Torah. I mean, when we go into something, when we analyze how things are being built, we can actually refer to the Torah and say that it has to be safe first. And it has to be safe for a long time, for the duration of this property. So,
and profit or expense is not an excuse at all. It doesn't even come into the thinking. The Torah doesn't say build a fence around your roof if you can afford it. When labor is cheap. No, it doesn't matter. Money is never part of the equation.
What about those who close their eyes and take the bribes? How do we treat those people who are supposed to be out there looking out for people? They are the ones, they're the officials. They are the officials that have been elected to protect the people. And what they do is they close their eyes again, put money first, safety last.
Yeah. Well, I know if a judge takes a bribe, according to Torah, the punishment is pretty harsh. Does it apply to officials, authorities? I would hate to have to judge because it's a serious crime. It's serious. No question about it. But the confusion, the moral confusion, is really the only serious problem that we have in the world today. It really is. If we were morally intelligent, if our moral IQ was high, life would be ideal. Because other than the lack of morality, we have no other lack, no other need that isn't being fulfilled. It's the only thing.
How do we get there, Rabbi Friedman? How do we get our morality back?
So I wanted to bring up this subject. I don't know if it's really relevant to what we're talking about, but this transgender, pandemic with young people, particularly girls, because statistically, the number of girls who want to become boys is much, much greater than the number of boys who want to become girls.
Why would that be?
Why would that be? I think it's safe to say that the 20th century was one huge social experiment. I think that would cover every event in the 20th century, no? Was communism not a great social experiment? Nazism a great social experiment? And the liberalism of the West, great social experiment. The 21st century is paying the price for those failed experiments. More specifically, the co-ed lifestyle, boys and girls going to school together all through their schooling years, from kindergarten through grad school. Everything is together. That co-ed plan, which was an experiment, and the belief was that boys and girls get to know each other better, they understand each other better, it will make marriages better, relationships better. It's been almost 100 years of this experiment. Has anything gotten better? Marriages are better? Relationships between men and women are better? We knew right from the beginning that this was not going to be good. We knew that it would not be good for marriages. We didn't think marriage itself would be thrown out the window. But that's what happened. In fact, we never thought that this mingling of the genders would end up in no gender, confusion about gender, discomfort with your own gender. It's horrible. It is horrible. It is tragic. And the media makes it sound like, oh, a simple solution. You don't like being a girl? Fine. We'll fix it. That flippant attitude is so inhumane because it is a very painful thing. It's a very painful process. I don't mean physically, emotionally, mentally. It's horrible. And all these images of people who trans, and they're all doing so well, they're all so happy. Fake news also has a limit. So here's what happened. Boys and girls are always together. The result is girls suffer terribly. It's too painful to be a girl these days. Because girls are more sensitive than boys, more vulnerable than boys. So when you mix them together, who's going to get hurt? Who's going to be mistreated? Who's going to be looked down upon? Who's going to be taken advantage of? And who's going to be told that they need to please the boys? So feminism offered a solution. Don't feel inferior. Don't try to please the boys. Do your own thing. It's not working. Does anyone have the courage, the moral fortitude to actually get up and say, this whole idea, this mixing of boys and girls has not been good for boys or girls, but particularly for girls. They feel weak, they feel vulnerable, they feel like second-class citizens, and that is totally unacceptable. So if we can do something to help girls feel proud, feel superior, not in a negative way, but in a realistic way. That we actually have to defend motherhood? Is that not a disaster, a social disaster? That women have to worry whether they're 2 pounds overweight, or a little too short, or a little too tall, or a little too blonde, or a little too dark. Nothing is ever good enough. How can you live like that? It's cruel and unusual punishment for young girls So right now, actually tomorrow, I'm going to be starting a program for teenage girls for 3 weeks to learn about Judaism. But there's a secret agenda. Of course, they'll come away prouder Jews, but hopefully they will come away prouder girls. Just proud to be feminine, proud to be female, proud to be girls. How else can a society survive? So, anybody willing to admit that this was a mistake?
I am.
There was a school, a public school in California, maybe 20 years ago, maybe more. They decided to do an experiment, and they separated the boys and the girls, the high school, for 1 year in the name of a social experiment. The results of the experiment, grades went up dramatically, mostly for the girls. Attendance improved dramatically. School spirit improved dramatically. And when the year was up, they went back to co-ed because you're not allowed to separate boys and girls. How crazy are we? You did the experiment, and the results are convincing. It's better for the girls, it's better for the boys, it's better for the school, it's better for everybody to make the classes separate, but no, you won't do it. Which God are you worshiping? Which God has the authority to tell you to do what is harmful to your own children, but that's what the God demands? Too many gods.
I'd like to come clean at this particular point. My views changed almost 6 years ago. And before that, I was actually part of this great experiment that you have just mentioned, Rabbi Friedman. And I have to tell you, when I found my true feminine side, which was mingled in and kind of shuffled, and feminism and, equality, where women strive to be equal to men, be able to handle as much as man, and do the role reversal. That did not work out as well as my separation, my womanly separation. I didn't lose. I won, for sure. I trusted our teachings. I started to learn the Torah and the laws and doing, not just learning, but practicing. And very honestly, I can say that it definitely gives a lot more strength to me. My place did not change, but my inner stamina, who I am, has definitely improved by a mile. And definitely all those things that you have mentioned, caring about being an inch too fat or an inch too thin or tall or short or any of those things, always wanting to be attractive to the opposite sex. This is what the society wants us to be. We have to be attractive. Everything in today's society is either sexy or not. So all those things are very, very complicated for women. And realistically, dropping all of that societal nonsense really gives a woman strength. And I'm speaking from experience. So, just kind of wanted to put it out there. So thank you for doing what you're doing, of course, among so many other things that you do for the world today. So hopefully that the seminar is going to be extremely successful and productive.
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm sure. Sounds very exciting. Thank you for sharing that, Rabbi Friedman. By the way, I do have a Gallup poll of society in accordance to changing one's gender. And 51% of Americans who were surveyed think it is wrong. However, 46% think it's absolutely acceptable. So this is where we stand today as a society in accordance to the changing one's gender. So I don't know what that means. I mean, you changing a group of girls is amazing, but the numbers are atrocious. So the society, I can say, basically almost 50% are in favor, or at least find everything that is happening right now acceptable. So what do we do with those horrific numbers?
The first thing we do is we talk about it, like we're doing. Make people stop and think for a minute. I mean, if I was stopped in the street and I was asked, are you in favor of trans surgeries? Then if people want, yeah, why not? That doesn't mean I'm in favor. It means I don't care. People want to have a surgery, let them have surgery. That's not a real opinion. Those who say they're against it, that's a real opinion. It's not indifference. So of those who say, yes, sure, it should be legal, it should be available, how many of them think it's a good idea? How many of them would be comfortable if their own child comes home and says, I want an operation? I think that would go down to at least half. So how you ask the question and which question you're asking. But is there a statistic of the boys versus the girls having operations?
I did not actually look. Maybe there are, but I did not look for those specific. I will after this program, just as a point of interest. But this is just the general rule. Yet I know some parents who are actually okay with it because all they're concerned with, such as society today is concerned with, I want my child to be happy. Whatever makes them happy. And people are very afraid to say no or have an opposing point of view because, God forbid, I will make my child or somebody unhappy.
And those same people 10 years ago would have said, absolutely not. So have we become more enlightened or more frightened?
That's genius, yes. I would say more frightened.
Afraid to have an opinion.
Rabbi Friedman, but where do we, I'm sorry, we're just trying to cover as much as we can today. This is an amazing conversation. Abortion and society. In a lot of the countries around the world, abortion is actually a form of birth control. A lot of countries, such as Russia, for instance, I don't know now, but, 20, 30, 40 years ago, for sure, 50 years, I don't know. I'm not that old. Used abortion as birth control, and it was the norm. Let's have all the fun in the world, whatever the consequences, we'll take care of it a little later, in this kind of a way. Doesn't matter that it's, and nobody thought more about it than what it is. So, and so it became the norm. And this is how things become the norm in the society. And I'm sure it's still happening in different parts of the world. I don't know where, but I'm pretty certain that it's, it's the herd effect. This is how we do it. This is how everybody does it. So I guess it's okay to do it. Nothing wrong with it. What's moral about it? Everybody's doing it.
Too many gods. Too many gods. Who made it acceptable in the first place before it became popular? It was made acceptable based on science. If you take a look at the makeup of the fetus, you know, the molecules and the DNA if you reduce it down to that, sure, why not? So based on that scientific observation, abortion became acceptable. Because technically it's just a little bit of stuff. Every human being walking around on their own two legs is just a bunch of stuff. So the God of science, or scientism, has become a big problem. Too many gods. When did science become an authority on morality? Since when do you decide something is moral or immoral based on science? That was not part of the plan. That was not what science was for. It became a god. Can't have more than one god. It always leads to bloodshed. I mean, it's idolatry, and it always leads from idolatry to bloodshed to sexual decadence. The three always come together. Where you find one, you will find the other.
Okay, so that's actually things are becoming a little bit more clear. I never actually looked at things from that angle. I'm sure not too many people have. Thank you so much for clearing that up. What about death penalty? Death penalty, as far as I know, is acceptable in the laws of Torah laws. However, there's, of course, a lot of rules of how it is handled. So what would you say about today's death penalty, the way it is? Would that be moral or immoral?
The caution is understandable and correct. But the moral clarity or the moral judgment says that certain people should no longer be allowed to live. Clearly. Are you sure that this is a case where the accused should not be allowed to live? Well, let's look into it some more. Let's check it again. Let's be sure 100%. And that's hard to be 100% sure. So I don't know how this would work exactly, but a murderer should be found, who's found guilty of murder, should be sentenced to death. In fact, they're on death row. But they're there for many, many years. They agree, most of them, they agree that they should not be allowed to live. The real murderers, they will tell you, I should not be allowed to live. Do we want to actually take their lives? No, we don't. But to change the verdict from death penalty to life imprisonment, that doesn't do anybody any good whatsoever. The ruling should be, for a crime like this, you deserve the death penalty. Absolutely without a question. I'm just not 100% sure that you did the crime. So I will rule If I find you guilty of murder, I will sentence you to death. And then be very cautious about actually implementing it. But to say we're against the death penalty, that's crazy. No one ever deserves to die. No one ever forfeits their right to live. Nobody. You're making a mockery of life.
But yet taking your own life is a sin.
Right. We'll go to great lengths to save a guy who's jumping off a bridge. We don't try that hard to stop a guy from killing somebody else. Very confused.
Rabbi Friedman, and the last point that would actually kind of complete today's program as far as how we value life in today's society is the question about the living will. The living will, 45% of Americans have a living will. Now, obviously, living will means I don't want to be put on the machines. If I can no longer be alive because of natural way, then please don't do anything to continue it. Is that moral or immoral?
The individual has a right to say, I don't want painful operations. I don't want to be handicapped or as a result of the operation. So please don't. Yes, he has a right to say that. But here again, we have to be very cautious. We're so careful not to execute a murderer, but we'll jump at every suggestion. Somebody wants euthanasia, we'll give them euthanasia. Again, so inconsistent, so confused. If a guy says, I just don't want to live anymore, are you supposed to honor that? No, of course not. But if a guy says, should I develop a condition in which I cannot live unless you perform some dangerous operation, don't do the operation. That's a very different story. Sometimes the family has to overrule the living will. Just like we have to rethink time and time again whether the person we're condemning to death was really guilty. You also have to think carefully over and over again. The guy who signed that living will, did he know what he was signing? Did he realize what he was doing? If he was of sound mind today, would he still think the same thing? You got to be cautious. Going back to abortion. A woman comes into a clinic, she wants an abortion. Okay, fine. What do you mean, fine? Maybe she's just in a bad mood. Maybe she's just a little overwhelmed by the bills and the problems, and her boyfriend is leaving her. Don't vent it on the baby. Tell the woman to come back next week. Make an appointment with a counselor. Make sure that she really means what she's saying and that she really needs to have the abortion. Be careful with life, like you sometimes are. You don't let a guy jump off a bridge. You know he's jumping because he has problems. You know he's not happy, so let him. A woman comes in pregnant. You know she doesn't want the pregnancy. She's not happy about the pregnancy, so let him. No, we don't let the guy jump, but we instantly approve the abortion. confused, inconsistent, incoherent.
But I do see a problem. It's financial. Abortions cost money. We can't ruin the industry. It's a whole big business that needs stem cells, that needs to make money on the procedures, and it seems like it's back to building a building and trying to circumvent the safety, or talking a woman out of an abortion. That's all hitting the pocket of a lot of people. So I guess we're still this kind of a society.
Yeah. Imagine if somebody would say, slavery is such a good business, makes so much money. So let's find a way that we can go back into selling people into slavery, because the profits are, wow, amazing. And if anybody would say, yeah, I sold these kids into slavery, it's really good money. Would anybody buy it? Would anybody accept it? Look at the inconsistency. So why, for money, you'll do this, but no amount of money can get you to do that? Who's setting these laws? How many gods do you have? Jews are very proud that we brought monotheism to the world.
Apparently not.
We gave the world monotheism. Do we really have monotheism?
Not based on today's conversation, Rabbi Friedman.
Nope. We still have too many gods. And by this definition, a god is the authority that decides what's moral and what's immoral. So if politicians can decide, if doctors can decide, if scientists can decide, if every woman can decide what's moral or immoral when it comes to her own body, how many gods do we have?
Too many. Need to go back to the source, need to bring morality back. Rabbi Friedman, thank you so much. Unfortunately, this was absolutely amazing, educational, informative, wise, and as always, brought so much clarity to where we are and where hopefully we're going, and hopefully we will get to the right place very, very soon. Thank you so much, and so much looking forward to our next conversation, which will bring just as much wisdom. It does every week. And Rabbi Friedman, thank you so much for this time that you allocate for us on a weekly basis.
And I keep asking the good questions.
Will do my best, Rabbi Friedman. Thank you very, very much. Till next week.